Hello, thanks for joining me. I'm in the Carmarthenshire market town of Newcastle Emlyn. In this video, I tell the story of a dramatic and tragic event which occurred here over a century ago. On the evening of Friday the 25th of November 1904, the ironmonger's shop belonging to Mr. T.M. Daniels on Water Street was still open and serving the last few customers of the day. At this time, shops stayed open until late in the evening, and between 7 and 8 customers could still expect to be served. The shop was a large one and supplied many local tradesmen. It was owned by Mr. Daniel of Cardigan, where the main shop lay, but managed by Mr. D. E. Nicholas, who lived over the road at London House. He was upstairs with a customer cutting glass for him. Downstairs were the apprentices, Ivor Jones, aged 16, Owen Nicholas, 17, and Arthur Lloyd Davis, 18, who were stock-taking, and 2 customers, William James Morgan, a 31-year-old carpenter, and Daniel Thomas, a 43-year-old blacksmith from nearby Capel Ewan. Miss Annie Jones, the manager's servant, just popped in to ask him a question. Another boy, John Jones, was going upstairs to call him for her when suddenly a huge blast occurred. The apprentices were blown into the air, the shop stock and the windows were blasted across the road, some of it landing by the porch of the chapel over the road. Boxes, trunks, farm implements, machines, lamps and so on were scattered all over the street. The windows of the properties opposite were smashed, including Tom Lloyd's grocery shop. The blast was so loud it was heard for miles, and the earth shook. People thought it was an earthquake. The blast was swiftly followed by a blaze. The wooden ceiling of the shop had caught fire. People rushed to help with buckets, and the fire brigade arrived and put out the fire. Those upstairs managed to battle their way through the smoke and flames and exited the building through a back door. The door had been blown off its hinges. 19-year-old Annie Jones, who had been standing by the front step, escaped onto the street, but her clothes were alight. A Mr. Oak, a fishmonger of Cardigan, came to her rescue, but she suffered burns to her face and arms. Owen Nicholas, one of the apprentices, had his clothes burnt and blown off. He suffered burns and cuts. Ivor Jones, another apprentice, suffered burns to his face, head and hands, and the customers also suffered cuts and burns to their faces and hands. One apprentice had not managed to get out onto the street. Arthur Lloyd Davis was still trapped inside the burning building. Mr. David Morgan, a butcher, heard his cries and went in to rescue him. He was taken to the nearby Plough Inn, and his father, a house painter who lived at Lloyd's Terrace in Adpar, just over the bridge, was sent for. So what had happened to cause such a calamitous event? Well, the ironmonger's shop sold, amongst many other things, explosives. There was a large fireproof safe near the counter by the window. This contained cartridges, gunpowder and blast powder. From the subsequent inquiry, it emerged that this was not always locked. It was also a few yards away from an open fire and in the proximity of a host of other potential sources of ignition, including paraffin lamps and customers smoking in the shop. Unfortunately for Arthur Lloyd Davis, the safe was inches from him in his position on a ladder just by the safe, where he was stock-taking, counting out wood screws and calling out the numbers to a fellow apprentice. When he spoke to his father, he described being blown to the ceiling and back down onto the counter. His injuries were very severe. He had lost his sight and had extensive burns. Despite medical attention, he died at home on the Monday morning, 3 days after the blast. The inquest was held at the Red Cow Inn, Adpar, just opposite Lloyd's Terrace, where Arthur Lloyd Davis lived and died. The inquest jury recorded a verdict of death due to the explosion, but had no evidence as to whether it was accidentally caused or not. The shop owner was deemed to have taken sufficient precautions and cleared of blame. The jury kindly donated their fees to the family of young Arthur Lloyd Davis. On Saturday the 3rd of December 1904, his coffin was taken from his house, borne by his friends, and carried the short distance over the bridge, past Bethel Chapel which he had attended, and to the church. The service in his house was taken by the Reverend Evan Phillips, his minister, and many young people from Bethel attended the funeral at Holy Trinity, Newcastle Emlyn. His father, George, a house painter, his mother, Eleanor, and his brothers and sisters were joined by many other relatives and a great number of townspeople, including the owner of the shop, Mr. T. M. Daniel. Blinds were drawn, businesses closed as a mark of respect. And as Arthur Lloyd Davis was lowered into the earth of the family grave, the newspaper report tells us, the scene was a sorrowful and pathetic one, many breaking down under the stress of deep emotion. There is no headstone to remember this young man. His cheery disposition and his many friends of all ages were his epitaph. His parents are buried in the same place. His father died in 1912, aged 64, and his mother lived until 1941, dying in her 91st year. The survivors of the accident would have carried the scars of that terrible evening for the rest of their lives. An investigation into the accident resulted in a report by a government inspector. He concluded that Arthur Lloyd Davis, who was on a ladder just by the safe to get the wood screws when he was stock-taking, may have accidentally dropped or knocked some iron or steel item onto the floor, where it sparked and met dust from the gunpowder in the safe, and that was enough to cause the rest to ignite. He also condemned the owner of the shop for not registering the premises as an authorised place to keep explosives, the Newcastle Emlyn Council and the County Council, who didn't enforce the Explosives Act, and the police, who turned a blind eye. I hope you found this little-known episode of Newcastle Emlyn history interesting. Please remember to hit the like button and consider subscribing to the channel. And as always, thank you for watching.